You landed with 2 hours to kill before boarding. No problem, you think. You'll just find your gate and sit down. Except somehow, to get anywhere near that gate, you first have to walk through what feels like an entire shopping mall, past perfume counters, sunglasses displays, a bookstore, 3 separate coffee stands, and a duty-free section the size of a small grocery store. If you've ever wondered why it's basically impossible to get from security to your gate without walking past dozens of things for sale, here's the uncomfortable answer. It's not an accident of building design. It's one of the most carefully engineered retail environments most people will ever walk through, and it's built around a customer with almost nowhere else to go. Let's start with the layout itself, because this is where the strategy begins before you've even reached your gate. In a huge number of airport terminals, especially ones rebuilt or renovated in the last couple of decades, retail and dining areas are deliberately positioned directly in the path between security and the gates, not tucked off to the side as an optional detour. This is sometimes described in airport planning circles as a forced path retail model, and it exists because airports discovered something extremely valuable. Once you're past security, you are, for all practical purposes, a captive audience. You can't leave. You can't easily comparison shop somewhere cheaper. You're simply there, with time to fill and very few alternatives to filling it. Here's a curiosity gap worth sitting with. Why do airport prices feel so much higher than the same items would cost anywhere else, even accounting for the obvious cost of running a business in an airport? Because in a very real economic sense, you're not really paying for the coffee or the sandwich itself. You're paying for the fact that you have no other realistic option once you're already past the checkpoint. Economists sometimes describe this as a captive market, a situation where competition essentially doesn't exist because leaving to find a better price simply isn't a viable choice anymore. That's precisely why the same bottle of water can cost triple what it would at a corner store 10 minutes from the terminal. It's not really about the water. Let's talk about the security checkpoint itself, because the psychology doesn't start after it, it actually starts right at it. Anyone who has removed shoes, emptied pockets, and shuffled through a scanner while half focused on getting their belongings back together knows the particular kind of mildly frazzled, slightly stressed state that process leaves you in. That state matters. Research on decision-making under mild stress and depleted mental energy has found that people in this condition are more likely to make quick, low-deliberation purchases rather than carefully considered ones. Airports place some of their highest traffic retail immediately past security specifically because that's when a traveler's guard, mentally speaking, tends to be at its lowest, still recovering from the minor ordeal of getting through the checkpoint in the first place. Now let's talk about time itself, because airports do something clever with it that most other retail environments can't. A shopping mall competes with dozens of other ways you could be spending your afternoon. An airport terminal, once you're past security, is competing with almost nothing. Boredom becomes an asset here in a way it isn't anywhere else, because shopping and eating become two of the very few available activities to fill an unpredictable stretch of waiting, especially once a flight delay stretches that 2 hours into 4. Airport retailers know this, and it's part of why gate areas are so often ringed with shops rather than simple waiting rooms, turning dead time into an environment engineered to feel like an activity rather than idle waiting. Let's talk about duty-free specifically, because this section deserves its own closer look. The framing of duty-free as tax-free savings creates a powerful anchor before you've even looked at a single price tag. A built-in sense that anything purchased here is inherently a deal simply by virtue of the label. In practice, duty-free pricing varies enormously, and the savings compared to regular retail prices are often far smaller than the tax-free framing implies, sometimes non-existent once currency conversion and markup are factored in. The word duty-free is doing an enormous amount of persuasive work on its own, well before anyone evaluates whether the actual price in front of them is genuinely competitive. One of the most profitable businesses in the entire airport isn't an airline at all, it's food. Think about the last time you grabbed something to eat before a flight. Maybe you weren't even that hungry, but with boarding an hour away, eating suddenly felt like the safest option. Airport restaurants understand that uncertainty changes behavior. You don't know when you'll eat next, whether the food on your flight will be good, or if your connection will leave enough time to grab a meal later. That uncertainty pushes countless travelers into buying food just in case. Notice how many airport restaurants display their menus far outside the entrance. They aren't simply advertising, they're reducing decision effort. Travelers carrying bags don't want to walk inside multiple restaurants comparing options. By placing giant menu boards in plain view, restaurants make choosing the easiest option feel like the smartest one. When people are already mentally occupied with travel, convenience often beats careful comparison. Then there are the familiar brands. Whether it's a global coffee chain or a famous fast food restaurant, airports are filled with businesses you've seen hundreds of times before. That's because familiarity creates trust. After navigating security, checking departure boards, and worrying about boarding times, many travelers instinctively choose something predictable over trying an unfamiliar local restaurant. Psychologists call this the familiarity effect. When people are under uncertainty, they naturally gravitate toward what they already recognize. The seating arrangement plays a role too. Notice how many restaurants have open fronts instead of enclosed walls. You can see people eating, hear conversations, and smell food long before you've reached the entrance. Those sights and smells aren't accidental. Research has consistently shown that sensory cues, especially the smell of fresh coffee or baked goods, can increase spontaneous purchases by triggering cravings that weren't there just moments earlier. Let's talk about the departure screens. Nearly every restaurant and cafe positions digital flight information displays where customers can see them without leaving their tables. That isn't simply a convenience feature. It removes one of the biggest reasons people avoid sitting down to eat in airports: the fear of missing their flight. If passengers can monitor their gait while having lunch, they're much more willing to spend $30 on a meal instead of grabbing a quick snack. Have you ever noticed how difficult it can be to find a drinking fountain compared to finding bottled water for sale? In many airports, vending machines and convenience stores are impossible to miss, while free refill stations are fewer, less prominent, or tucked into corners. Even when free water is available, buying a bottle often feels easier than searching for it. That's another example of friction. Small inconveniences can dramatically change what people choose. The currency exchange kiosks, scattered through most international terminals, run a similar play with far less subtlety. Their exchange rates are almost always noticeably worse than what you'd get from a bank card or an ATM outside the airport, sometimes by a significant margin, and the fee structure is often buried in fine print. Most travelers don't stop to read while standing in an unfamiliar country with a flight to catch. These kiosks exist specifically inside the terminal, rather than competing openly with better rates elsewhere, because the same captive market logic applies here as it does to the bottled water. There's genuinely nowhere more convenient to go, and convenience, in a space like this, is worth a great deal more than a fair exchange rate to most travelers in the moment. There's also the boarding announcement pattern worth knowing about. The way gate calls are staged in groups: first class, then priority, then general boarding by zone. Beyond the practical logistics, this creates a subtle status hierarchy playing out in real time in front of everyone in the waiting area. And airports and airlines have found that this visible tiering increases the appeal of premium upgrades and loyalty program purchases, because the gap between groups called first and groups called last is made publicly, repeatedly visible to an entire gate area of people who just watched it happen. Airport lounges deserve a mention here too, because their placement and marketing follow a similar logic. Lounge entrances are frequently positioned along the same high-traffic corridors as regular retail, visible to every economy passenger walking past on the way to a much less comfortable gate area. That visibility isn't incidental. Seeing quieter seating, better food, and free drinks just behind a glass wall while sitting in a crowded gate area yourself is a deliberate contrast, one that makes credit card offers promising free lounge access considerably more appealing in the moment than they might seem sitting at home reading the same offer in an email. And gate proximity itself has quietly become a commercial tool. Some airports have begun experimenting with variable gate assignments tied to loyalty status or fare class, placing higher-spending travelers closer to security and lower-fare travelers at gates requiring a longer walk past more shops on the way. Whether or not that longer walk was the primary intention behind a given gate assignment, the effect is the same either way. More time, more exposure, and more retail passed along the route for exactly the travelers with the least negotiating power to avoid it. Here's the part that ties all of it together. None of these individual pieces, the forced retail path, the captive pricing, the post-security fatigue, the framing of duty-free, the visible boarding hierarchy, the lounge glass wall, the variable gate placement, would move the needle much in isolation. It's the entire environment, stacked together and refined over years of data about traveler behavior, engineered around a passenger who has time to fill, nowhere else to go, and a slightly lowered guard from the process of simply getting there. And once you understand how deliberately that whole environment was built, the next long layover starts to feel a little different, less like unstructured downtime and more like walking through a retail space that was specifically counting on exactly that downtime existing in the first place. With very little standing between you and the next thing, it's hoping you'll buy simply because there's nothing else to do. And every design choice from the checkpoint to the gate was quietly built with that exact moment of boredom in mind.